Exactly 1 hour ago, the heavy oak doors of royal tradition didn't just close, they were bolted shut from the inside. Princess Anne, a woman whose life has been defined by an ironclad commitment to duty and a legendary refusal to engage in public drama, has finally broken her silence. But this wasn't a whispered rumor or a leaked tabloid tip. This was a direct, surgical strike from the heart of the monarchy. In a statement that felt more like a legal verdict than a family update, the Princess Royal confirmed what millions had suspected, but few dared to say out loud. The royal ties of Meghan Markle have been officially, permanently, and irrevocably severed. No warning, no second chances, no olive branches. For years, the world has watched a digital chess match play out between London and California, an exhausting cycle of headlines, documentaries, and insider reveals. But while others danced around the issue, Anne has always been the one watching from the shadows, measuring the cost of every headline. Now, it appears she has decided that the price of reconciliation is far too high for the crown to pay. Inside the hallowed halls of Clarence House, during what was supposed to be a routine coordination meeting, Anne reportedly delivered a 13-word sentence that changed the landscape of the British monarchy forever. The weight of this moment cannot be overstated. We are not talking about a temporary hiatus or a cooling-off period. We are witnessing the most significant institutional lockout in modern history. The crown hasn't just moved on, it has performed a total system reset. Anne, acting with the quiet authority of a daughter who watched her mother protect the throne for 70 years, has drawn a line in the sand that cannot be erased by any PR team or American interview. As the news echoes through royal circles and across the Atlantic, the question on everyone's lips isn't just why now, but how deep does this go? Is this a quiet exile intended to bring peace to the palace? Or is it a devastating strategic move designed to ensure that the rogue narratives of the past 5 years can never again touch the future queen? The silence from the palace has been replaced by a chilling clarity. The Princess Royal didn't just speak to share news, she spoke to end a war. And for the Duchess of Sussex, this finality might be the most crushing blow yet. Stay with me, because as we peel back the layers of what happened behind those closed doors, you will realize that this wasn't just about personal friction, it was about the very survival of the institution itself. The era of diplomacy is over. The era of the firm has returned. To understand why the Princess Royal chose this specific moment to act, we have to look back at the shadows lengthening across the Atlantic during the first week of November 2025. While the public was focused on the upcoming holiday season, a far more calculated game was being played behind the scenes. It began as a low hum, a sudden, synchronized surge of reports in major American media outlets. These weren't your typical gossip columns. These were sophisticated, high-level narratives, citing highly placed palace insiders who seemed to have intimate knowledge of the king's private schedules and the internal budget of the Prince and Princess of Wales. For Princess Anne, who has spent over 5 decades navigating the treacherous waters of public life, these reports didn't smell like random leaks. They smelled like a coordinated campaign. Anne is not a woman who panics over a few bad headlines, but what she noticed was a pattern of strategic destabilization. The details being leaked were twisted just enough to be damaging, yet framed in a way that mimicked the internal language of the palace. It was a classic disinformation tactic. Use a grain of truth to sell a mountain of deception. According to sources within the palace legal team, Anne initiated her own private review. She didn't hire a PR firm. She used the monarchy's own internal security and communication analysts. Within 72 hours, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The source trail for several of these exclusives didn't lead back to disgruntled staff in London. Instead, the digital breadcrumbs pointed toward a network of PR affiliates in Los Angeles, individuals who had worked closely with Meghan Markle's former media team during her initial transition away from royal life in 2019. Anne reportedly sat in her study at Gatcombe Park, surrounded by printouts of metadata and timeline charts. She saw that every time the Princess of Wales prepared for a major state engagement, a source-led story about Meghan's supposed suffering or a new commercial venture would conveniently break 3 hours prior. It was a media pincer movement designed to drown out the work of the working royals. For Anne, this crossed a sacred line. It wasn't just gossip anymore, it was sabotage. She reportedly told her senior staff that the institution was being weaponized for personal narratives. The monarchy, in her view, is not a reality show, it is a constitutional pillar. To allow an outside entity to manipulate its internal data for the sake of brand building was a breach of security that she could no longer tolerate. By November 8th, 2025, Anne had compiled what insiders call the White Drawing Room dossier. This wasn't a collection of feelings. It was a forensic analysis of media hits, IP address locations, and known affiliate connections. When she requested a private meeting with King Charles at Buckingham Palace, she didn't come to complain about family friction. She came with a strategic assessment. Inside the White Drawing Room, beneath the gaze of their ancestors, Anne laid out the evidence. She showed how 3 specific articles published in early November had used confidential information regarding royal security protocols, information that could only have been gleaned from old palace briefings. She made it clear that this was not a series of unfortunate coincidences. It was a coordinated strategy aimed at the very structure of the monarchy. Anne's argument was cold and logical. She told the king that defending the monarchy's image was secondary to defending its structure. If the firm could not control its own narrative, it would cease to function as a sovereign entity. It would become just another celebrity brand, subject to the whims of the highest bidder or the loudest influencer. She pointed out that the current no-comment policy was being interpreted as weakness, allowing rogue narratives to set the pace of royal life. The king, known for his desire to keep the peace and his lingering affection for his youngest son, reportedly listened in a heavy, contemplative silence. But Anne's evidence was undeniable. She had tracked 11 separate instances, where confidential palace briefings had been remixed and sold to American tabloids within 24 hours. This was a leak that had become a flood, and the source was unmistakable. "This is not about revenge," Anne allegedly told her brother. "It is about survival." She argued that the monarchy could not continue to coordinate, even on a basic level, with a team that used that coordination as ammunition for its next media strike. She proposed a total blackout, a severance of all communication channels, both formal and informal. No more back-channel diplomacy, no more heads-up on future announcements, and certainly no more shared resources. This meeting set the gears of the palace machine into motion with a terrifying precision. Within days, the legal and communications teams were looped in, but under a strict need-to-know basis. They began the process of building a permanent firewall. Anne's alarm bell didn't just echo, it shattered the status quo. For the first time in years, the skeptics inside the palace, those who thought the Sussex drama would eventually just fade away, started paying attention to the cold, hard data. The Princess Royal had transformed a messy family feud into a matter of national security and institutional integrity. She wasn't acting as a disgruntled aunt. She was acting as the protector of the crown's digital and narrative borders. The message was being prepared, the lines were being drawn, and the sabotage that Anne uncovered was about to meet a response so final, it would leave no room for a sequel. The silent operator had seen enough, and the counter-operation had officially begun. The morning of November 16, 2025, was marked by a biting chill that seemed to seep through the very stones of Buckingham Palace. Inside the 1844 room, a space typically reserved for receiving world leaders and ambassadors, the atmosphere was even colder. This was not a social call. There were no cameras, no vibrant floral arrangements, and no tea service. Instead, the long mahogany table was covered with folders, digital tablets, and a heavy sense of impending finality. Princess Anne had convened this gathering with a singular purpose. She was joined by Prince William and Queen Camilla, a trio that many royal observers have begun to call the New Inner Circle. Also present were the palace's most senior legal advisors, the head of digital communications, and 2 top-tier security officials. The king had given his blessing for this council to form, but it was Anne who held the floor. She did not start with an emotional appeal, she started with a dossier. Each attendee was handed a document that ran 38 pages long. This was the culmination of the investigation Anne had spearheaded, and it was titled Project Narrative Integrity. The report outlined a systematic pattern of media activity spanning from 2020 through late 2025. For the first time, the palace wasn't just looking at individual headlines. They were looking at the architecture of a campaign. Queen Camilla reportedly raised a sharp eyebrow as she turned to a section labeled Disruption Days. This specific analysis documented how negative press cycles regarding the Princess of Wales, often focusing on tired, debunked grievances, appeared with near-perfect synchronization to Catherine's major royal engagements. The data showed that within 24 hours of Catherine launching a new initiative or attending a high-profile gala, a competing story would emerge from the Sussex orbit. Anne pointed out that the statistical probability of these events being coincidences was nearly zero. Prince William remained stone-faced, his eyes scanning the data with a grim intensity. For William, this was not just about the institution, It was about the protection of his wife and the mother of the future king. Anne's voice, calm and direct, cut through the tension. She told the room that the monarchy had reached a binary choice. They could either act now to reclaim the narrative, or they could surrender the crown's dignity to a cycle of perpetual clickbait theater. "We are currently in a state of reactive paralysis," Anne allegedly stated. "We wait for the attack, we endure the noise, and then we hope for the best. That strategy has failed." She proposed a radical shift. Her recommendation was a policy of absolute severance. This meant the end of all unofficial communications. No more friendly check-ins between staffers. No more heads up on upcoming press releases, and a total shutdown of the back channels that had allowed information to flow often one way across the Atlantic. Anne argued that the monarchy could not be a partner in its own destruction. If the Duchess of Sussex wanted to build a media empire, she would have to do it without the oxygen provided by the palace's internal coordination. The room felt the shift in gravity. This was the numerical rule of royal survival. The institution must always be greater than the individual. Even the legal advisors, who are usually the first to suggest caution, found it hard to argue with the evidence. The dossier showed that confidential briefing notes from 3 separate royal tours had been used as the foundation for exclusive chapters in upcoming American media projects. The breach of trust was not just personal. It was a violation of the professional standards that keep the monarchy functional. William was the first to offer full support. He spoke about the need for a clean break to allow the working royals to focus on their constitutional duties without the constant shadow of manufactured drama. Camilla, who has endured decades of media scrutiny herself, agreed that the current situation was unsustainable. She noted that the Sussex brand was increasingly being built upon the dismantling of the royal brand, and that no corporation, let alone a sovereign state, would allow such a relationship to continue. Anne then moved to the final, most sensitive part of the meeting, the vote. While the king would ultimately sign off on the decision, he had requested a unanimous recommendation from his most trusted circle. This was the moment the monarchy reached its limit. One by one, the senior royals and their advisors signaled their agreement. It was an unofficial vote, but its weight was absolute. The palace would formally and permanently end all coordination with the Duchess of Sussex. "The monarchy moves slowly," Anne reportedly observed, "but when it moves with the weight of centuries. Today, we move." As the meeting drew to a close, Anne stood up and looked around the room. She didn't offer a celebratory smile. She simply nodded to the legal team to begin drafting the protocols. She famously uttered 4 words that would be repeated in whispers among the staff for the next several months. "Then we're done here." With that sentence, the era of appeasement was over. The 1,844 room had seen many historical treaties, but this was a treaty of a different kind, a declaration of independence from a digital war that had drained the palace's energy for years. Anne had led the charge, not with a public outburst, but with the cold, hard efficiency of a military operation. The staff in the room described the feeling as a heavy relief. The decision was made to implement the severance quietly, but with absolute clarity. There would be no public shouting match, but the internal update would be felt immediately. Every shared calendar was unlinked, every communal press folder was encrypted, every digital bridge was dismantled. For Princess Anne, this was the only logical conclusion. She had watched her mother, the late Queen, manage the crown with a never complain, never explain mantra, but Anne understood that in the age of 24-hour news cycles and viral algorithms, that mantra needed an upgrade. It needed a firewall. As she walked out of the 1844 room that morning, she wasn't looking back at the conflict. Ba was already looking forward to the peace she had just secured for the next generation. The monarchy had drawn its sharpest line in decades, and for the Duchess of Sussex, the silence from London was about to become deafening. The true catalyst for the Princess Royal's decisive intervention wasn't a concern for her own reputation, but the relentless, calculated pressure being placed on the woman who represents the future of the monarchy, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Throughout 2024, Anne had been quietly documenting a pattern that moved beyond mere tabloid gossip into the realm of professional sabotage. She observed that whenever Catherine achieved a significant public milestone, a media storm from across the Atlantic would inevitably follow, designed to drown out her message and replace it with manufactured controversy. The breaking point arrived on October 18, 2024. Catherine had traveled to Leeds for a major children's charity gala, delivering a widely praised, deeply researched speech on the long-term impact of youth mental health. It was a moment of pure constitutional duty, highlighting a cause she had championed for years. Yet, by midnight that same evening, The digital landscape had been hijacked. Multiple American-based outlets began circulating exclusives regarding Meghan's old grievances, pulling focus away from the charity and toward a rehashed family feud. Anne was reportedly furious. She told a senior aide that this wasn't about personal friction anymore, it was about using the monarchy as a stage for distraction. For a woman who has spent 70 years respecting the boundaries of the institution, the idea that a charity event for vulnerable children could be sacrificed for the sake of a PR counter-narrative was intolerable. Anne saw it for what it was, a shadow campaign aimed at the future queen consort. Working in close coordination with Prince William's office, Anne began the meticulous task of charting these coincidences. They outlined 6 specific events in 2024, where Catherine's public work was disrupted by sudden, Sussex-related press cycles. The data showed a terrifyingly efficient pattern. Every time Catherine's approval ratings climbed or a new project gained traction, a leak would occur to reset the narrative. Anne realized that if the palace did not intervene, Catherine would be forced to conduct her entire royal life in a state of permanent media defense. In early November, Anne personally briefed King Charles, presenting him with a timeline of these overlaps. Her warning was blunt. This is not sustainable. It is reckless. She argued that public trust in the monarchy would inevitably erode if the crown seemed unable or unwilling to shield its own working members from coordinated external attacks. Anne's perspective was shaped by a lifetime of observing the late Queen's stoicism, but she recognized that the digital age required a more proactive form of protection. Her advocacy wasn't born out of a feud with Meghan. To Anne, the Duchess was a variable, but the institution was a constant. Her primary concern was that the monarchy's infrastructure was being used as a platform for clickbait theater. If Catherine, the future queen, could not perform her duties without her voice being drowned out by an orchestrated noise machine, then the functional purpose of the royal family was being compromised. Anne told a courtier that if they allowed the future to be sabotaged today, there would be no institution to pass on tomorrow. Inside the palace, Anne's involvement changed the gravity of the situation. While other members of the family might have been inclined to wait and see, Anne's military-style precision demanded a resolution. She framed the protection of Catherine as a matter of institutional self-defense. She reminded the king that as the eldest working royal and the daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, she had a duty to ensure the stability of the succession. The strategy Anne proposed was not a public shouting match, but a total withdrawal of the narrative fuel that allowed these attacks to flourish. By cutting off all coordination with Meghan, the palace would effectively remove the Duchess's ability to claim inside knowledge or palace sources. It was a move designed to deplatform the drama, and believed that by creating a total firewall around the working royals, they could finally allow Catherine's work to speak for itself, free from the shadow of Californian press releases. This shift from observer to protector was the turning point. Anne began spending more time at Kensington Palace, acting as a sounding board for William and Catherine. She encouraged them to ignore the noise and focus on the architectural strength of their roles. She assured them that she would handle the heavy lifting of the institutional break, allowing them to remain above the fray. For Catherine, Anne's support was a shield. The Princess Royal's authority within the family meant that the decision to cut ties was no longer a matter of sibling rivalry or in-law tension. It was a royal decree, sanctioned by the most experienced working member of the family. Anne had signaled that targeting Catherine was not just a personal insult, it was a direct attack on the crown itself, an attack that would no longer go unanswered. By the time the final statement was being drafted in late 2024, Anne's fingerprints were everywhere. She had ensured that the focus remained on stability and duty. The message was clear. The monarchy would reclaim control of its story. They would no longer allow their schedules, their events, or their future queen to be treated as collateral damage in a media war. Anne had drawn the line, and she had done so to ensure that the clickbait theater ended where the real work of the crown began. The implementation of the decision was not a public spectacle, but a silent, surgical removal of any remaining digital and administrative threads. By December 3rd, 2024, the palace's legal and communications teams had finalized what is now referred to internally as the Zero Coordination Protocol. This was the moment the monarchy shifted from a defensive posture to a definitive offense, drawing a firm line in royal history that left no room for ambiguity or gray areas. Princess Anne personally reviewed every line of the internal directive, ensuring the language was firm, professional, and, above all, final. The core of this protocol was the total severance of future planning. In the past, there had been a courtesy of sharing schedules to avoid major public overlaps, but Anne argued that this courtesy had been weaponized. Under the new rules, the Duchess of Sussex was to be treated as a private citizen with no more access to the royal calendar than any member of the general public. Anne's final comment to the senior advisors before the document was circulated was reportedly, "It ends now, before this becomes our undoing." When the official statement was released on December 6, 2024, it bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Anne's conviction. It did not contain the warm, familiar language of much-loved members of the family that had characterized previous communications. Instead, it was a lean, 47-word declaration. It read, "All future coordination with the Duchess of Sussex has been formally concluded. There was no emotion, no attack, and no room for reinterpretation." It was a clean cut, executed with the precision of a woman who understands that in power politics, silence is often more devastating than 1,000 words. Inside the palace walls, the shift was immediate and absolute. Within 24 hours of the statement's release, a system update took place across the various royal households. Meghan's name was removed from internal rosters, formal engagement lists, and even the unofficial update logs used by lower-ranking aides. A source at Kensington Palace noted that it was as if her name had vanished overnight. It wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of institutional reset. Anne reportedly told a confidant during this period, "We didn't attack her. We simply outgrew the chaos." For the Princess Royal, the decision to avoid direct contact with Meghan during this process was a strategic choice. Anne did not write a message, she did not place a phone call, and she certainly did not ask palace officials to soften the tone of the severance. To Anne, the silence wasn't coldness, it was clarity. She believed that any further dialogue would only provide more material for the very media cycle she was trying to break. By refusing to engage, she denied the Sussex team the oxygen of a response. The reaction from royal watchers and global media outlets was one of shock. Headlines from London to Los Angeles read like obituaries for a royal relationship. Critics called it the monarchy's coldest move in decades, but inside Clarence House and Buckingham Palace, there was a quiet, palpable sense of relief. The constant reactive paralysis that had gripped the communications teams for years had been replaced by a focused calm. For the first time since 2020, the palace was no longer waiting for the next grenade to be thrown from California. They had simply dismantled the throwing range. Anne's only public engagement during that momentous week was a veterans' charity event in Portsmouth. She walked among the rows of former service members with her usual brisk, no-nonsense demeanor. When a reporter attempted to shout a question regarding the formal conclusion of ties with Meghan, Anne did not even turn her head. Her silence was her shield. Her calm demeanor spoke volumes. The storm had passed, because the crown had decided it was over. Behind the scenes, Anne began focusing on future-proofing the royal protocols. She worked with the Prince of Wales to ensure that the zero coordination rule was integrated into the long-term strategy for the next 20 years. This wasn't just about Meghan. It was about establishing a precedent that the monarchy would not be bullied or manipulated by any external media entity, regardless of family ties. Anne's logic was that the firm must function like a sovereign state, protecting its borders and its narrative with absolute sovereignty. The impact of this surgical cut hit the Sussex camp harder than any public feud could have. Without the inside track on royal events, their ability to time their own announcements or leak competing narratives was severely diminished. They were no longer royal adjacent in the eyes of the palace bureaucracy. They were outsiders. Anne had ensured that Meghan's name would never again appear in palace planning documents, not out of bitterness, but out of a deep-seated conviction that the institution comes first, always. As the dust settled in mid-December, staffers at both Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace noted how quickly the atmosphere returned to a sense of normalcy. Royal calendars moved forward with a newfound efficiency. The Princess of Wales resumed her engagements without the shadow of coordinated press sabotage looming over every speech. Anne had achieved what many thought was impossible. She had ended a media war without firing a single public shot. She had used the most powerful weapon in the royal arsenal, the ability to simply stop opening the door. For the Duchess of Sussex, the most devastating royal silence had begun, and Princess Anne was the one who had turned the key. Princess Anne has never been one for theatrics, but she knows a storm when she sees one, and she knows another is on the horizon. Within 48 hours of the palace's December statement, rumors of a Sussex media counterattack began to swirl across digital platforms. Some speculators hinted at a tell-all interview in early 2025, while others mentioned production meetings for a new documentary series. But Anne was not shaken in the slightest. She reportedly told a close aide, "Let her speak. We have said all we needed to. To those who know the Princess Royal, this steady resolve is her hallmark. Insiders say Anne believes the monarchy has finally found its boundary, and it will not move again. The institution has been tested repeatedly since 2020, but the Meghan chapter revealed something vital to the firm. Clarity is more powerful than defense. Anne's decision to support a full severance was not about silencing a critic. It was about reclaiming the sovereign right to be ignored by those who seek to destabilize it. She reportedly said during a strategy call in January, "We do not need to answer everything. We only need to stand still and be sure of who we are." While other royals might worry about the next day's headlines, Anne focuses on the architecture of the future. She is reportedly drafting a new set of internal guidelines designed to prevent future media manipulation, especially involving the royal children. Her view is not reactive, it is architectural. She wants the crown to withstand another 50 years of scandal, not just survive the next 6 months. In her mind, the Meghan Markle exit was a needed renovation, a removal of a structural weakness that allowed the outside world too much leverage over the internal sanctum. Perhaps most notably, Anne has ensured that the future queens, especially Princess Catherine, will never have to face this specific kind of digital battle alone again. Her leadership during this crisis set a new tone inside the palace, one of zero tolerance for coordinated press sabotage. She has established a firewall of silence that serves as a protective barrier for those who carry the heavy weight of the crown's future. Whether the Duchess speaks out again or not is now irrelevant to the daily operations of the palace. The oxygen of publicity has been cut off at the source. As we look toward the remainder of 2026, the impact of Anne's surgical cut is undeniable. The monarchy did not collapse under the weight of the Sussex departure. It recalibrated. It became leaner, more focused, and significantly more disciplined. Anne, the quiet royal with the loudest impact, made sure the crown walked out of the storm not weaker, but wiser. She has proven that the most effective way to end a conflict is not to win the argument, but to leave the room and lock the door. So there it is. Princess Anne has done what no one else would dare. She did not lash out, she did not defend her ego, and she did not play the media's game. She ended it. For Meghan Markle, this marks the end of any royal return, any half-in, half-out fantasy, and any claim to the inner workings of the British state. The palace has drawn its line, and Anne made sure it will not be crossed again. What comes next? Only time will tell how the narratives in California will shift now that they have no mirror in London to reflect against. But one thing is absolutely clear. The monarchy will not be waiting for an apology, nor will they be looking back. Anne has anchored the ship, and the royal family is now sailing into calmer waters. As this royal chapter closes for good, we see a monarchy that has reclaimed its dignity through the power of a single, devastating silence. The woman who once walked behind the Queen's coffin with such stoic grace has now performed her final great service for her brother's reign. She has secured the silence. She has protected the future queen. And she has reminded the world that while the monarchy may be an ancient institution, it is still capable of a very modern, very sharp, and very final resolution. The firm is back in business, and the business is duty, not drama. Subscribe for more exclusive updates as we continue to track the new era of the British monarchy, an era defined not by what they say, but by what they no longer need to hear.